Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for May 8th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. Brendan, I like the idea of this podcast. I don't know about the execution of it, but the idea, I think, is
Well,
pretty good.
I was going to say to you, JD, I don't just love the idea of you, I just love you.
Oh, well, I love you as well.
I got a little sweeter with that one.
Get a little romantic on this episode.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about a romantic comedy. The idea of you.
Yeah, comedy, maybe loose terms. We'll talk about that.
Romantic movie.
Romantic movie, yeah.
Romantic drama.
Yeah, some comedic tones.
something.
It's a romance. Yeah, romance. for
Romance
sure.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're here to talk about The Idea of You, a film that honestly wasn't too much on my radar until some of the reviews dropped, and I heard some people talking about how it was a little surprising. Or maybe it was just the Anne Hathaway of it all, because who has a bad thing to say about Anne Hathaway?
Nobody. And
Nobody.
If you do, get off this planet.
Exactly. We're going to fight if you do. She is the absolute best.
Yes.
I love me some Anne Hathaway, so when the reviews were encouraging, go see this, Anne Hathaway's great, then I was all on board for that. So we're here to talk about The Idea of You. This is directed by Michael Showalter, which I did not realize until just a little bit ago as we were getting ready to do this review.
You're setting yourself up for this podcast review, aren't you?
Maybe. Look, it stars Anne Hathaway and Nicholas Galitzine, and it's pretty much those two.
Yeah.
There are a few others, Ella Rubin, Annie Murnolo, Reed Scott, a few others that come and go throughout the film, but it's mostly those two actors here. If you're not familiar with The Idea of You, it is about Solène, a 40-year-old single mom who begins an unexpected romance with the 24-year-old Hayes Campbell, the lead singer of August Moon, only the hottest boy band on the planet. You know? That's what it is.
And yeah, they make sure we know as an audience, they are in fact hot.
They are. Yes. They want you to know that.
Yes.
Okay? Look, I honestly haven't sought out the discourse on this one. I haven't seen it as much. I have protected myself to some degree.
Okay,
however, I very much do imagine that there's some heavy debate on this film, given that there is a vocal group of individuals on social media that the whole age gap thing, that's a big talking point these days.
Yeah, and the film is about that. Like, it at least tries to address that. So like that is sort of baked into the narrative here.
Absolutely. So I guess depending on where this conversation goes, anyone out there listening, I'm curious, genuinely curious where people fall on it, because this film does very much try to address that.
Yeah.
In some interesting ways that may or may not work. But let's talk about it. Brendan, what did you think about The Idea of You?
I really like the idea of you. That's kind of the review. And I feel like we're sort of dancing around that in that way. So I guess just to get the pun out of the way, I didn't hate this movie. It's primarily due to the fact that it has really good chemistry between its two leads. I think Nicholas Galitzine and Anne Hathaway are really good together. Anne Hathaway is giving a performance that is like God tier for a movie like this. It's like, if I had to speculate maybe why there has been some positive word of mouth around this movie when it first came out, I think it really is the Anne Hathaway of it all. It's not even fair she's just showing off here for how good she is at her job, right? And she is
Yeah.
that good here. I think Nicholas
Mhm.
Galitzine, I think, is also very charming. Like some of the moments of quietness between them are pretty good. I think if I have any issue with the movie and why I don't think it fully works in totality, it sort of goes back to this joke that you had at the beginning of this show where you didn't even realize this was directed by Michael Showalter before going into this conversation.
Mhm.
And Michael Showalter is a filmmaker that I do mostly like. I mean, I really enjoyed The Big Sick and Hello, My Name is Doris. But he has
Yeah.
a certain style that I would say is a bit more practical, a bit more lived in, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Even though they depict very unique and abstract situations, they are very practical in their own way. And the idea of you is a movie that is ultimately about art as well. I mean, it's about two artists falling for each other in their own way. And I guess I wish the film itself maybe had a little bit more of an artistic spirit behind it. There's too much of a plainness in the filmmaking that I think doesn't take enough advantage of the type of romantic movie it's trying to be. And I don't necessarily think that does the film any favors. I saw this on Letterboxd. Our good friend Sophia Simonello actually wrote this on her Letterboxd blurb for this film, and that it needed a lot more Nancy Meyers energy. And I
Mhm.
totally agree with that. I think what she used to bring to some of her movies back in the day, like with The Parent Trap, for instance, I think could have used that type of posh,
Yeah.
and I think that's sorely missing here to really give the film any type of personality to take advantage of some of the avenues it wants to explore. Has some daring ideas on its mind. I give it credit for that. I just don't think it fully takes advantage of
Mhm.
them enough, despite the good chemistry between its two leads.
Yep, I am right there with Brendan. I'm pretty mixed on this film. I don't hate it, but I don't particularly love it either. Anne Hathaway is great. I
Mhm.
wholeheartedly agree with you. She gives an astounding performance here. Another
Yeah.
letterbox review I came across, although I do love Sophia's sentiment there, but I'm reminded of good friend of the show, Jay Ledbetter's review for this. I don't know if you
Oh,
saw it or not.
I
I'm
did. Yeah.
paraphrasing here, but he said something along the lines of Anne Hathaway is so good at her job in this film that it makes everything else around it that's not so good. You see that contrast. It
Oh, yeah.
she's so
Yeah.
good, everything else and it not
Yeah.
being good really
It's
comes through.
basically his way of maybe saying she's too good for a movie
Maybe
like
she
this.
might be too good for this material, and she really is great. Nicholas Galitzine, I think, is charming. He's
Mhm.
certainly good enough in this film, and I do think they have good chemistry. It's not Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt, and the Fall Guy good.
No, that's a better romance movie.
That's a better romance movie, and their chemistry is more striking. But Anne
Mhm.
Hathaway, Galitzine, they do their best to make it work. Where this
Yeah.
film does thrive, it's because of their performances almost
Yeah.
exclusively.
Yeah.
The writing here is extremely uneven, at
Mhm.
times just flat out tacky and
Yeah.
awful.
Sure.
There's a maturity and a grounded sincerity to the romance here that is a little jolting, and I say
Mhm.
that in a good way.
Yeah.
That does work for this movie, especially
Mhm.
because of what it is trying to be at its core.
Sure.
But that is then contrasted by these rom-commy tropes and gags that are so remarkably manufactured. Anytime
Mhm.
Solen and Hayes have a sincere moment, it's immediately followed up by a random guy taking a selfie with Solen when picking up his kid for summer camp. Like
Yeah.
those moments are so ridiculously counterintuitive here, and there is a lot of them.
There is. Yeah.
I think your comment about the direction of this film, I think, is really apt because, yes, it is about these two artists who are trying to engage in this romance and in this relationship. But this is a film that lacks any artistry. There's
Mhm.
no vision, there's no conviction to it at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
And in terms of how it's framed and structured, I don't know how else to articulate it other than this feels like a movie, like one of those bad movies you would watch on the Hallmark Channel. that's how this is at times.
It comes off
Especially
that way. Yeah.
when it's engaging in its rom-commy tropes. Now, when it's about Solen and Hayes having these intimate moments by themselves, those are good. Those are more than good enough. But when it strips that away and it becomes about the larger space that these characters envelop, and I understand to a degree they live in a world where they have to face other people and face potential consequences.
It's part of that celebrity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I get it. And the film at times addresses that these characters do want to hide from that, especially Hayes. I do understand that. But when the film faces the outside world, it is so tropey. It's so horribly manufactured and tacky. It's extremely tacky. And like you have these characters coming up to Solen, making these comments that do not feel authentic in any sort of way. Like it is all ridiculously contrived and executed in a way that just feels Hallmarky. I don't know how else other to articulate it other than
it's a very good word.
That bad. It is so diminishing to what is so good about this film. So like every time I did want to engage with it, anytime I thought the film built up momentum, the film itself just completely punched that momentum in the face, and it just kept spiting itself.
Yeah, I think in many ways, Michael Showalter was just the wrong director for this kind of material. Because you look back at his films, they have very unique circumstances, but he doesn't relish in grand settings or grand worlds, right? And there is a bigness to this movie, at least the world that they live in, right? The world that these two artists live in, especially Hayes. He is a celebrity. His band, August Moon, is basically a One Direction ripoff in many ways. And I know some people have speculated that he's meant to kind of be the Harry Styles of this world, and maybe Anne Hathaway is kind of the Olivia Wilde of this world in some ways. So you kind of have like a "Don't worry, darling" merriment happening. I think that's all just speculative. I'm not saying it is or it isn't there, but clearly that's sort of the influence of the Hayes character in some ways. But there's a bigness to that. And I don't necessarily think Michael Showalter is the best director at tapping into that bigness and making it still feel very intimate and real, because it doesn't feel very real, as you're talking about. It loses that intimacy. The moments between just the two of them talking, I found more believability in the bigness of their world just based on their performances and what they had to say to each other. If that were the whole movie of them just maybe in her house eating sandwiches together, I probably would have dug that movie. But I mean, I do understand that this is a movie that, given not just the artistic world they live in and the celebrity of it, but also the age gap between them. He's 24 and she's 40. They do address some worthy topics. And I know the movie, given that setting and given that establishment, has to go there. So it talks about whether if the roles were reversed, would it even be much of a taboo thing? I think that's a worthy question to ask. Does the movie have a insightful answer or any commentary on it? No, it kind of just asks the question. I feel like that's really all it does. So again, I just, there's a bigness that I think this movie needed from a filmmaking standpoint to really capitalize on some of those big ideas and this big world. And it just comes off as Hallmarky, like you're saying.
I agree. It doesn't really explore these ideas in any insightful or meaningful way. If anything, it really is the antithesis, right? Where I think of the moment where, okay, the movie is going to bring to light this age gap.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that play out in this movie where we get a scene between Solen and the Reed Scott character of Daniel, who admittedly is her ex-husband. And through conversations earlier in the film, we do come to see why Solen despises this guy. So there's already a little bit of a tug of war between them. And in terms of audience expectations, the film has essentially set up Daniel to be an antagonist to Solen. And it comes through in Reed Scott's performance as well, where the guy is extremely grating. So not much
materialistic. He comes from a very different cloth, so it's clear why they didn't work out. But and to be fair, his performance, I think, sells that fairly well. even if it is maybe, contrived from a character writing standpoint.
Yes.
But I think I was angry when I saw him on screen. So if anything, maybe the performance at least works where it counts.
Yeah, I mean, he is grating. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about it. Absolutely. And maybe that's the writing. Part of it certainly is the writing and
Yeah.
some of the choices that we've come to learn that he's made as it relates to Selene.
Yeah,
for sure.
borderline hypocrite for sure.
Not even borderline, extreme hypocrite.
Yeah,
Which the film calls out later on in
It
the film
does, yeah.
very directly. But Reed Scott performatively, yes, when he's nails on a chalkboard when he's on screen. But I think the film is certainly calling for that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
However, that is to say, there comes this moment when the film wants to explore this age gap and this character who has absolutely zero moral ground to stand on is confronting Selene to be like, well, what is this? This is inappropriate. And it's very superficial. It adds nothing to the movie. Again, it's very hallmarky. And it comes from a character that has no leg to stand on anyway. And maybe that's, I don't know, a complication that the film thinks is, oh, we're going to have this complex conversation between Selene and Daniel. And Daniel's this complex character, and so is Selene. And so when they confront each other with these hypocrisies, that's interesting.
Well,
I think it's the exact opposite in execution here.
I think the groundwork is there for something potentially to work, because that hypocrisy that we talked about with Reed Scott, he's also got this new girlfriend that's perceivably a lot younger than he is, right? So he's in sort of a similar boat and is then criticizing his ex-wife for doing something rather similar, but just the age. So just the genders are reversed, but then there's the celebrity of it all. So I think the groundwork is there for something that could be explored, but it leads to one confrontation, and then the movie all of a sudden has to start exploring Selene's daughter and how this affects her then. So then it just becomes overly materialized by that point. And it can't balance everything that it feels like it needs to say. It thinks it has to say everything.
And I guess that's why I find it so superficial and why those quote unquote complexities are hollow.
Yeah.
They're a facade. They don't really mean anything because the film doesn't explore those hypocrisies in Daniel.
Right.
It has the one moment where his girlfriend admits that to us. Again, the film directly calls out that hypocrisy.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that means anything because it doesn't really address the topic at hand. All it does is it points a finger at Selene for having this relationship. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? I mean, I guess because it's coming from someone who's engaging in the same behavior, it perhaps calls out the gender bias when it comes to these kinds of relationships. I guess you could have that argument there, but I don't know if that's earned in execution here.
Oh, I don't think
that's
it's
an
earned.
Interesting idea. I
think it's a great idea, and I think the film is aware of that idea, but it doesn't explore that idea. That's why I said earlier it's very good at bringing up the idea or posing the question, and that's basically all it does.
Yeah, exactly. And because I found that scene as it was taking place extremely frustrating. Extremely frustrating because here's an opportunity for you to truly tackle the topic at hand, and it fails to materialize anything of interest. It's extremely presumptuous in terms of character building and why that would matter. So any sort of commentary that's there is extremely tepid.
It's also kind of repetitive, right? Because I feel like, and we keep going back to those very intimate and dialogue heavy moments between Hayes and Selene, when it's just the two of them, when they explore art together, when they eat sandwiches at her house. The moments between them, they sort of instinctually talk about these things, right? So it almost makes the commentary on its own after the fact just a regurgitation of what was a little bit deeper beforehand, what was more natural about how it was explored. So I guess if anything, I know we mentioned the the Nancy Meyers comparison to have someone with a bit more artistic vision behind the camera to really take advantage of some of these ideas. But maybe we needed more of a simplified approach here. Maybe we needed more of like a Richard Linklater before sunset kind of thing here to I would have been okay with that too.
I agree, because the scenes that are most effective here are when it's just the two of them having those conversations, eating a sandwich, talking in the art shop there. Yeah. Like when it's just the two of them, and and that's where we find out more about Hayes and his upbringing, his audition to be in the band. Like those scenes are genuinely interesting.
Agreed.
Those are compelling. You see these characters, despite the age gap, find solace in each other in these weird and interesting ways.
They find a relatability there, which is great.
Absolutely. And it's what makes their connection physically feel, I guess, compelling here. Like when they start engaging in the romance, like all of that, I think was effective. It's when you get outside of that where, again, it just becomes all hallmarky. It's like the film was operating on with two different productions. It's like you have one director doing the scenes with just them two, and then all the other stuff where there's other characters involved, we send that to the Hallmark crew. Like it made no sense whatsoever. Like it's such a jarring transition between them. And I think maybe more than anything, it's just execution. Cause like, we talked about the Daniel scene earlier. I think of the pool scene as well. And the pool scene in a vacuum, I understand it because you have essentially not teenagers, but people in their young 20s acting as they would in their young 20s. And given the awkwardness of the situation, they do something presumptuous, as someone in that position might do. But I think the execution of it, again, is just extremely thoughtless.
It is, and that's unfortunate because I usually like Michael Showalter as a filmmaker. At least I've liked enough of his films beforehand, and I like the way he's able to find a sense of realism in his movies.
There's none in that moment.
There isn't, unfortunately, and that's why I think this material just wasn't really suited for him. I think that's definitely a part. And it's a huge missed opportunity because we do have two great performances with great chemistry, especially from Anne Hathaway, who is, again, showing off. Too good at her job. She's so great. Good at her job.
She's really good. And I guess my last final thought on that, because earlier you mentioned Izzy, and I agree. Like I love the idea of how Izzy responds to their relationship, where initially she feels one way, but because of certain ramifications that take place, that changes for her. Yeah. I wish the film spent more time on that. Like remove the whole Daniel moment and just emphasize Izzy and that evolution. And I think you really have something there.
There are too many subplots happening afterwards. Yeah.
I agree. I will say though, a subplot that I really enjoyed here is the Graham Norton appearances. Because I love Graham Norton.
I thought that was pretty good. Yeah, that was pretty good.
I did not anticipate him being in this movie. It makes sense with Hayes being British in the film. But I don't know if I've ever seen him in a movie before. So there's something about the surprise of it.
Playing himself really too. Fun. So
playing himself. Yeah, no, it's the Graham Norton show. We see a couple of times.
Yeah, he's not playing a character.
Yeah. I love Anne Hathaway. Her performance is great. Selene is a fascinating character, and I love her all the more that she's a Graham Norton show fan.
Yeah, that makes
yes.
I'd love to see this character come back. Maybe just with a better filmmaker behind it.
Yeah. I want Anne Hathaway to show up on Graham Norton as Selene. Make that happen in the sequel.
Okay, yeah, maybe one of her art shops really took off, and maybe she signed the right client or something, and
there you go.
Yeah.
Real quickly, I guess without getting into spoilers though, what did you think of the ending? The time jump, I'll say, how that plays out.
Is that
too hallmarky?
No, because I think, in a way, I think given the hallmarkiness of what came before, it's kind of the way the movie needed to end by that point.
Yeah.
So it didn't feel tonally jarring, and at the same time, it's I don't necessarily mind that it ends there because I feel like the final shot still lingers in some form of ambiguity of will they, won't they. So I kind of still at least appreciated that if I take it in a vacuum. But I think the hallmarkiness of what came before seems to inadvertently suggest what is going to happen by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
So if anything, I think the ending is mostly hindered by what comes before, if that makes sense. I think it
Yeah.
would have worked better if it was maybe a little bit, if the rest of the movie that came before was a little bit more subtle in what we were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, I admittedly haven't read the novel this is based on, so I
Mhm.
don't know if there are any differences there. But I look at that ending through the prism of what you said earlier in terms of the artistic vision of this film or the lack thereof.
Mhm.
And in the hands of someone else, a Linklater, for example,
Yeah.
or anyone that has any sort of artistic backbone whatsoever, I think this ending would have been quite different. And I think there's a compelling ending here where you have that last conversation where you understand that because these characters are, I mean, they're clearly living two different lives. They're two separate
Mhm.
stages of their lives, that, you know, there's this proposition of, look, if you fall in love, take it. If you have a chance for happiness, you take it.
Yeah.
I think there's an ending there where you leave it on that ambiguous note, but you have this fascinating connection, this
Mhm.
final connection between the two of them. I think leaves a stronger imprint
Yeah.
on this film, these two characters, and what the age gap could mean.
Yeah.
But by not leaving it on that ambiguity, now there's still a little bit, but I still think the film pulls that rug out, that it kind of undermines any sort of thematic interest
Yeah.
that could be there.
I think again, I think the hallmarkiness of what we get beforehand sort of suggests something about that final shot that maybe the film didn't want to suggest. I think if there was maybe more of a tender honesty to the film in totality, this actual ending we got could have come off a little bit more like the ending of Before Sunset. The whole "you're gonna miss that plane." Oh, I
Yes.
know. I think,
Yeah.
and I think that's what the ending here is kind of going for. And I think it could have gotten there if what came before wasn't so obvious and suggestive.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, its
Yeah.
biggest problem.
I agree. Because I don't want to get too far into the rabbit hole of
Yeah.
what I wanted versus what this is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's another. I think there's a better ending before we get the coda at the end.
Perhaps.
And I don't think the
Perhaps.
coda at the end works either for the reasons you're talking about. So,
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
again, it all comes back to the execution here is sorely lacking.
Yeah.
And at times it's just straight up agonizing.
Oh gosh, that's actually, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I was trying to be nice because there are good qualities here. I gave this a 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd, but now I'm
Yeah.
starting to rethink that. I think it's more of a 2.5.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
But Anne Hathaway is great. She is
She gives a-
absolutely astounding here.
Her performance is one of the best of the year. It is that good, and honestly, that might be one of the film's biggest problems. Like, her performance is so good, it kind of makes the film worse. So yeah,
That's
you
why I
referenced Jay
responded to
Ledbetter's
Jay.
review. Yeah, he's spot on in that regard.
Absolutely. She is so good that it makes everything else feel so lacking
Yeah.
in comparison. I'll read it verbatim. I pulled it up here. The film's biggest problem is that Anne Hathaway is so great that it underlines how not great pretty much everything else is. That's like a lot of words to say that. Yeah, I think Jay.
We
nailed it
talked
there.
about some film critics out there these days that are just really good at the punniness of their reviews, and Jay is certainly one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff. At any rate, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, you can leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please hit us up on social media, rate and review us on those platforms as well. But hit us up on social media. Let us know if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here. You can always email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd as well.
Yeah.
You can do that. Let us know if you agree with our thoughts. Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here for this episode?
I don't think so. We didn't talk much about the music of August Moon here and
Did
how
we
it
though?
is. we acknowledge. I don't think we necessarily need to. It is basically, it's a one direction. Or it's more like half a direction is basically what it is.
No direction.
No direction. That's a better. It's no direction. Yeah. I'd certainly believe it more if it was as good as One Direction. Which, say what you will about them, they at least had some pop hooks. They really did. I didn't care for the music. It's not an influence on me as a musician, but as a pop band, they were good at it. I can't necessarily say the same thing from the little bit I heard of August Moon here.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, all of that is done very cheaply.
Yeah.
As is a lot of the film, not centered on Celine and Hayes.
Yeah.
It's hallmarky, extremely hallmarky.
Oh, come on, Michael Showalter. You're better than that. The
right.
Big Sick was really good. Hello, My Name is Doris might be my favorite film of his, honestly.
I love
that
too.
movie.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I honestly, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Between this and The Eyes of Tammy Faye, and I didn't see Spoiler Alert. Did you see Spoiler
Oh,
Alert?
I didn't see that either. I heard okay things about that. I think from a review aggregation standpoint, it's not too far off from The Idea of You. So who knows? Maybe that'll be another example of one that doesn't work for us. But I don't know if that at least retains or maintains rather the simplicity of his earlier films, then it would probably work better for me.
Yeah, I agree. So I would love to see him get back to that 2015 to 2017.
that earlier run. Yeah,
frame. Yeah, because I don't know if you saw The Lovebirds that came out in 2020 as the pandemic was going, or 2021. something like that.
Yeah,
it was like mid-pandemic, and it is not good.
No, it's not. No.
It's terrible.
I give that movie credit for being less than 90 minutes long, though.
Yeah, that's fair. But it's mostly it's difficult to get through.
No, that's unfortunate.
And look, The Eyes of Tammy Faye is that's probably my favorite of his since then, but I still don't love that either.
Again, that's a Jessica Chastain performance. It's elevating the movie itself.
Yeah, it appears his next film is Oh, What Fun. I really hope it lives up to the title. I hope that it is fun. We'll see.
Do we know who's in it yet? Has it revealed anything about it?
I don't know. I'd have to look more into it.
Okay.
Starring Michelle Pfeiffer, Chloe Grace Moretz, Dominic Sessa, Felicity Jones.
Okay.
Here is the synopsis.
Okay.
Claire Closter makes the Christmas magic happen every year for her family, but her children and grandchildren don't realize the effort it takes until she goes missing. If that doesn't sound like a Hallmark movie, I don't know what does.
Oh my gosh. Well, first off, Dominic Sessa in another Christmas movie.
Yeah.
Okay. Guess
The
he's becoming our new
cast
holiday
looks
boy.
great. Yeah. So like,
Yeah. I don't know. That maybe that'll work.
it's an American Christmas comedy film. This says upcoming.
Okay. Well, I mean, his sensibilities I think could work in the holiday film format.
I hope so.
I could see that working. So hopefully it at least fits the bill better than this one did.
I agree. All right. Anyway, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us here to the end as we talk a little Michael Showalter.
Yeah.
And I just a quick thing here, real fast, quick plug. Episode 584, the main show this weekend or this last week, we talked about How Green Was My Valley, continuing our Best Picture series there. And we have a review for The Fall Guy that is out as well. So be on the lookout for that. And we'll see you guys next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Anne Hathaway, Queen.
She's
Hathaway.
Love Anne Hathaway.